Air on air. Hey, good morning, everyone. As always, we try to start on time and end on time. Thank you for joining us for another coffee break with 2KB. Today, we are continuing our series in practical, actionable strategies to help set your EPC on a path for success. The spotlight this morning is navigating the early IGA process. I'm George Buchanan, founder and CEO, excuse me, of 2KB Energy Services, based in Atlanta, Georgia. For the past 30 years, I've worked on energy infrastructure projects across public and private sectors. And for the last decade, I've had the privilege of serving as an ESPC owner's representative and project facilitator on large scale energy and capital projects. I am pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, Jason Perry, the Director of Utility and Energy Management at the University of Georgia for the Facilities Management Division. Jason has been at the center of UGA's ESPC journey, and we're looking forward to getting his perspective on the IGA process and just in general, working at a major university. I think he's going to have a lot of good things to share with us today. Jason, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So again, we're going to cover a lot, but in general, talk about the role of the IGA in establishing an energy baseline, technical findings being aligned with stakeholder expectations, best practices, and just a whole host of other things here. The Q&A is open at the bottom of the screen, so as you have questions, please do drop them in. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible here in the half hour we have. So, Jason, let's start, right? Tell us about the University of Georgia Facilities Management Division.
Oh, well, we call ourselves the heartbeat of the university. I imagine there may be other divisions at the IGA who also call themselves the heartbeat of the university, but we have, depending on current occupancy of positions, we have between 800 and 900 employees in FMD. We currently are searching for an associate vice president. So if anyone's out there is interested in that, keep an eye out for the posting. We have everything from my division, or my department, which is oversees the central steam plant. We also pay all the utility bills out of our department, track sub-meters for over 1,000 different either sub-meter accounts or utility accounts. Our FMD has a cabinet shop, a plumbing shop, a welding shop, pipe fitters, electricians, both in building kind of low voltage or medium voltage electricians, as well as a central substation that we have a high volt shop that manages all of our campus side distribution. Waste reduction services, trash collection, recycling, handling, hundreds of building service workers. You may know them otherwise as custodians, custodial staff, groundskeepers. Let's see whom I'm missing. A warehouse that provides all of the paper towels, trash bags, trash cans, light bulbs, everything you can imagine out of the building that I'm sitting in, which is the Chicopee complex, which is an old mill on the east side of downtown Athens.
Great. Yeah, I mean, lots of moving parts, right? So
absolutely, I call the university campus biomechanical organism that has millions of moving parts, it's like running a small city. In fact, it's a city that has 4 or 5 times the population of the town I grew up in. So, it's incredible. It's really fun.
Excellent. Thank you. I mean, and look, with all of that going on, that kind of infrastructure is built over time, right? So there are ways, there are practices and standards that are developed over time to keep the trains running on time, right? And so this vehicle, energy savings performance contract, is different, right? I mean, it's sort of set apart. I know you were involved in the university's previous phase, probably to a lesser extent than now, but you're currently in an investment grade energy audit
Mhm.
for performance contracts. So, I mean, just initial question. I mean, what from what you've seen in both the previous phase and where we are today, why is the investment grade audit so crucial for the project success?
Well, I think that a big part from my perspective is, we have an interest in this kind of selection of buildings that, the purpose of this project was to try to take a bite out of the buildings that we have that still are on outdated HVAC controls.
Hmm.
And so, of course, that gets broadened as you look at ECMs to be able to fund that. The buildings that were the priorities aren't necessarily the best metered buildings, for example. So, like if you look at the main library, when we were initially looking at the energy use intensity based on the data we do have, it looked rather low on the heating side. And the reason is that there's no steam meter there, except that there's a 10-inch steam line that goes into the building that is, I can probably hear from here humming away. And, we have steam meters on 85 buildings, but it's connected to 120. And so most of the ones that are not metered are pretty small. That one was one I was surprised. I should say that I um, was becoming the interim director of my department at the time when we were launching this. And so, I've been in this department since 2021, been in FMD since 2014. But there's still stuff I don't know, or stuff I don't know that I don't know yet. And so, like when I discovered there was no steam meter on the main library, I was like, "What the hell? Like, why didn't they do this? And why didn't I notice that there's no readings there?" So, that's one example of, okay, well, we're going to need to really do a deep dive, or have the contractor do a deep dive on the energy modeling, or come to an agreement with them about how are we actually going to set the baseline for this building that we, clearly it uses a lot of steam. We have no idea how much it is.
Yeah.
And so let's figure that out.
Well, I mean, so, consistent, let's stay with that, right? So, are you, well, two-part question, right? I mean, what have you seen the energy services company do in sort of response to that situation? And sort of how has that struck you? How do you, thinking ahead, right? I mean, you have to measure and verify savings or really absence of consumption, but
Mhm.
given the available data set, what have you seen that's, you would tell someone else, one of your peers, is sort of a good practice given the situation that surely isn't unique to UGA, right?
Mhm. Well, they weren't really concerned or surprised. They've seen this before. Uh, we talked about different approaches, and the one that we all settled on was to do an eQuest energy model, which I'm familiar with eQuest. I haven't used it in years, and I know it's challenging, but it's also a skilled operator can do a lot of really good work with it. The challenge being, calibrating the model, of course, if you're trying to get an absolute value of energy versus a relative value. He's looking at different measures. Um, so, I mean, it's either that or don't do it, right? So, and so we have to be willing to take somewhat of a risk that the energy model is going to be right. We have lots of opportunities to look at their work. They're not hiding it at all, of course, and I would really be reluctant to move forward with someone who did. And so, being able to trust that they're doing the right methodology and being open about it, and giving us an opportunity to check the results. One of the interesting things about it is uh, they're doing the heating side of savings in terms of natural gas consumption. So we generate steam with natural gas, but there's hundreds of feet of pipe between that particular building and the steam plant,
Mm.
and inefficiencies throughout that entire system, from the boilers at the plant through the steam distribution, condensate return, heat exchangers, traps, all that stuff. And so we have to use our best information about what we think the efficiency of that entire system is, to be able to get to a calculation of therms of natural gas and savings. And so, there are a lot of, I don't want to say gray areas. There's a lot of wiggle room for error in
Mm.
all of that. And so I think the right approach, which is what everyone is taking here, is to be on the conservative side, so that when we get into the phase of doing MMV, hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised.
No, absolutely. That's great. I mean, good insights there. I mean, again, this is not going to be an infrastructure situation that's unique to UGA. So certainly some takeaways there. I mean, something that maybe is more unique to UGA, right? Every organization, to us anyway, is its own sort of special snowflake, right? So, you know, thinking about the process that you would normally, or UGA would normally follow for a capital project. In this case, how do you bring together O&M, engineering, executive leadership early on in the process to keep the trains on schedule?
Yeah. Well, I mean, O&M has been on board from the beginning, because the scope of the project was developed from a list of buildings that were their highest priorities to replace the controls in. And of
Mm.
course, once we got into the study, based on the amount of money that we've been approved to borrow, there's nowhere near enough to do all of those buildings to the extent that we would like. But it's this is one arrow in our quiver, and we don't, it's not going to save everything for us. But we have to look at, in a world of finite resources, we have to look at every opportunity. And so even if it's not going to get everything done, that's not a reason to not do it at all.
Yeah,
O&M has been an easy sell.
yeah.
um,
Now,
some of the
engineering.
additional ECMs, there's been some back and forth about, like, whether that's really worthwhile, or skepticism maybe about some of the savings. And we're taking that in stride and kind of working through, what the contractor has in the background of their thinking about why are they proposing this particular thing instead of this. Senior leadership, the this project was initiated by now our former AVP, in the sense of, he has done a lot of performance contracting in his career. We had done it once as an organization. The university system, this would be the third third fourth one that the
Uh-huh.
university system has moved forward with, if we go forward with it. And so that's not a lot of experience from a system level, and it would be the second one for UGA, and pretty much everyone who was involved in the first one isn't here anymore. So at any rate, it was instigated by the person who was the leader of FMD, with the buy-in from his leadership. And then, of course, being a state institution, to be able to borrow that amount of money, it had to go through our senior administration to approve that at the system level. And so, that buy-in was achieved at the very beginning. And if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be doing it, right? So now the continuation of all of that is occasional touch points with those folks to let them know the progress, hear what the implications are. There's always going to be some nervousness about borrowing a large amount of money, especially in, well, any economic environment, it seems like. But so, you know, giving assurance that there are off ramps. We still
Mm.
have a couple of off ramps ahead of us. If they just are like, nope, not going to do it, which I don't think is what's going to happen, but there's that could happen. And being able to have the confidence to say like, look, we have the ability to walk away from this. I think that gives them some reassurance, but um, you have to make the case that like, look, either give me the money or let me borrow it. It's we have to do these things. That and I don't know that they like hearing that, but sometimes some folks say like, well, why don't we just fund this ourselves? I'm like, okay, why don't we? Thanks. Where's your checkbook? So, uh, and yeah, I'll stop there. But for everyone who's a part of this project, I continually say, this isn't a thing that's happening to us. This is a thing we have asked someone to help us with, and they're uh, required to do it the way we want it done by contract. And if we don't like it, we can stop, or we
Mm.
can make recommendations of like, here's what we would prefer instead of this, as long as it fits into the economic model to pay for itself. But uh, I think some folks can get into the mentality of like, oh, great, well, I guess we got to do this now, and it's just gonna happen. I'm like, no. um, we had some lessons learned from the first time around, and we're applying those to this one.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, so let's stay with that for a moment. So yes, we talk about O&M who's been on board, conversations with engineering, sort of senior leadership, those touch points. How about the folks who use the buildings and equipment, right? So you got your side, I'll say, but you've got you've got departments that are in the business of educating students, producing future leaders.
Mhm.
How do you communicate with them sort of this project, that how it's going and what's coming?
Well, we know just from experience as FMD that we need to be cautious with how we communicate possible future plans in a building, especially to the occupants. Obviously you do need to communicate at some point about what will be happening. It's best to know what is going to be happening. There's this kind of really touchy middle ground of well, we're proposing this, and it depends on the, I guess, user and the intensity of the building too. So, for a heavy research building, which we only really have one of those in the fleet of buildings that we're looking at, that's early conversations with the research facilities folks, because you're getting into fume hoods in critical laboratories, and that kind of stuff, and that you don't just foist that on them at the last minute. You start to build that buy-in as you move forward, and we're going to have a meeting about that next week for that particular building with all of the folks who are involved to smooth out some concerns and hopefully come to a resolution to be able to move forward with. Others where it's kind of just office space or classroom space, there's probably a bit more delay in communicating with the building owners, we call them, simply to not build too many expectations early on, so that if it doesn't work out, or if it's not as much improvement as we may have been able to present at first, they don't get disappointed. But in the early site visits, and we're walking around buildings and kind of clipboards and plans and ladders and stuff, obviously people are like, hey, what's going on? And we explain like, hey, yeah, we're just doing an energy audit, we're considering some improvements to the building. They're like, oh great, I hate this and this is awful. And like, so that's why you have to be careful about making too many promises, because they're like, oh, they're gonna redo our whole building. Like, maybe.
Yeah,
And then there's one of the buildings we're looking at is a performing arts center, and we had to be very careful about being clear that look, we're not trying to change the stage lighting and sound system or anything. We just think some of these halogen lights in the lobby ought to be replaced, and we want to look at the HVAC controls that will only benefit the integrity of the space.
sure. Excellent. I mean, Yeah. Again, sort of this theme, lots of moving parts, an organism, right? I want to go back because you talked about the impetus of this project being let's let's include address buildings that have aged HVAC controls.
Mhm.
And you talked about that being the focus, but then reacting and responding to ECMs that are going to fund that work. Um, any unexpected, unanticipated ECMs, design issues that come to mind?
Um, I'm a little surprised at the calculated length of payback for, say, lighting upgrades.
Mm,
And I chalk that up to them being rather conservative. We're not uncommon, but for smaller institutions, they may not be on real-time price for electricity. That throws a real curveball at the calculations for savings because we pay a different price every hour. We can't
mm,
predict what it's going to be other than looking at the weather forecast. It's usually temperature dependent, but day of the week dependent and time of day as well, and seasonal. And so, most of the time, our real-time price might be 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour for the marginal component of our energy use. And sometimes it's $2 um, in the middle of August in a weekday afternoon, and then it comes back down overnight. And so that I do not envy them to try to figure out what is a thing we can guarantee. Of course, they're guaranteeing energy savings, not cost savings. So that makes it easier on them. But being able to calculate the payback for all of these things is an important part of the audit. So that's not easy. I think they're just trying to be as conservative as they can. Something that we're talking about with O&M, there's of course, district steam gets to a building. We have a heat exchanger to convert it to heating hot water to be used in the building. And they've identified a number of those that they think replacing would be a savings opportunity, and a relatively lucrative one to help
mm.
subsidize the less lucrative, more desire, the things that we wanted to do, which is the controls upgrades.
Yeah.
And so, the O&M folks are like, well, I don't really think that's going to save a lot of energy. And so we need to have them, the contractor, kind of back that up a little bit and justify it. I'm on the fence. I think, if we had a different thing that we could do with that money with the same payback that more people would buy into, I'd be willing to go forward with that instead. But I mean, a poorly performing heat exchanger is a waste. So I
Mhm.
understand why they would go for that as an obvious thing. One of the heat exchangers that would have been an ECM in the project died during the energy audit, and we had to replace it anyway. And so um, that's I I jokingly refer to some of our capital renewal um, behavior as the bluesmobile approach to capital renewal, which is like just wait till it falls apart, and it's not a sustainable way to do it. But part of our issue is our technicians are so good at keeping things going well beyond their useful life
Mm.
that you get to a point where you just can't anymore, and it's so far gone. But it has built expectations from our campus customers and senior leadership that, like, oh, things just don't die, but
Mm.
they do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's a really good point you bring up. So let's think about that. I wouldn't go so far as to call it like a design standard, but standard operating practice, where performance contracts often say, yeah, this thing probably has another 5 years, but you should replace it. And we want to because this is the result that it will produce. How has that concept been received by your team?
Well, it's interesting because when LED indoor lighting was really becoming viable and economical, but not exactly it was certainly not the standard everywhere yet. I had done this is in a previous role in a previous department, but I did a life cycle cost assessment of replacing existing fluorescent lighting systems with LEDs, and was able to show that depending on the application, maybe a 2 to 3 year payback.
Hmm.
And that got the folks, actually the person in my seat at the time motivated enough to dedicate, a chunk of money every year to start doing LED retrofits. And we changed our design and construction standards to require LEDs where they were feasible at the time. And now it's like you have to justify using anything other than an LED if you want to do that
Yeah.
in a new project. And so that's taking working systems out of a building and putting in something else, even though it hasn't failed yet. And that was a striking change in stance at the time. And so, worked one of the ECMs that's used in pretty what it must be in every performance contract is lighting upgrades, right? Because it's supposed to help fund all the other stuff. And those are working lights. It's not we're not replacing dead fluorescent fixtures. They work, but
Hmm.
there's a better option, and it's so much better that it's worth taking out a working piece of equipment to do it.
Sure.
And so uh, we need to apply that to other things. Thinking about, I just had a meeting earlier, and this is not a part of the project, but we have chillers that are we have a chiller that is 36 years old. That's 11 years longer than the ASHRAE expected useful life of a piece of equipment like that. Um, it still works though. So do we
Sure.
wait till it dies and then go through all of the emergency stuff, like bringing in a temporary chiller and serving the building with that, and then designing a new replacement, or do we replace it now?
Yeah.
And the obvious answer is replace it now. And so, applying that to a heat exchanger, which is not that expensive in the grand scheme of things, um, uh, I think we just need to do some relative convincing of, well, we do it with this, we do it with this, why not that?
Yeah.
If we can show, we're not going to cut it open to prove that it's fouled beyond its usefulness, and here's the percent loss of efficiency, but we can probably look at a body of knowledge that's out in the world where they have done that, and we can apply that to this based on what we know about the water quality in the system and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, it's that's good thought or good insight. I chuckle. We'll laugh about this later. You talked about the meeting and the discussion on the chiller, and you gave an obvious answer, but I wonder, you don't have to answer this now, but what was the obvious answer in the room? But we'll get back to that later.
Well, that was a question about replacing it in kind or building a district energy plant to replace a number of chillers that are networked, but they were tucked away in mechanical rooms in different buildings in this district, and trying to justify the, you know, rather large relative cost to build a building and then put chiller slots in it to replace that chiller capacity in one place rather than designing it in every different environment where some of them are in penthouses that don't even have roll-up doors to get a chiller in or out, and we're like, what do we do, take the roof off, like how do we get that out, that kind of stuff. So that's the fun stuff.
Yeah, it sounds fun. Listen, I mean, as we bring it home here, I want to sort of the wrap up, right? What is, if there is, one piece of advice you would give to university staff, university leadership response with similar responsibilities to what you have in
Mm-hmm.
preparing for this process?
Well, I think you're gonna like this answer, which is to have yourself an owner's rep.
Hey,
And so if you're in facilities at a university, you probably get magazines like this, and I just happen to be walking by it on a table. But this guy I sat next to in a meeting on our campus, talking about building automation systems. But I got to chatting with him about performance contracting, and he has a lot of experience from his military days in doing them. So he's really comfortable. His Ole Miss is doing a lot of performance contracting just on a recursive basis. Um, so I asked him, like, so do you have an owner's rep? He's like, no, I don't really need one, but you definitely should. And if you read the article, it says that basically too. So having somebody as a quasi project manager to work with our project management team, but also an ombudsman and an advisor. I've never done this before. I'm pretty new to this whole thing, so I would be terrified to do this all by myself, and it would be really tiring.
Yeah, no, that's well, obviously I appreciate that. That's great. So yeah, we are right at time to this morning, sir. We didn't get a chance to get to some of the questions. Um, I think our team posts this webinar to the website, so of course you can get in touch with us. And I want to thank Jason for the time this morning and great insights provided. I'm really hopeful, or I'm sure that the folks in attendance can take something away from it. So thanks everyone again for joining us. Our next coffee break meeting will be in a couple of months. I'm not exactly sure the date, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, we'll go ahead and let everybody get back on to the 7 hours worth of work they have left to do in the day, and wish you well with that. So thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye.